Good evening, everybody. I want to welcome you all to Giving Space and Grace, a conversation on mental health and wellness. My name is Justin. I'm the general manager at Uncle Bobbie's Coffee and Books. As a lot of you know, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and we wanted to make sure that we had at least one event this month that addresses issues because, as we all know, the last year and a half has been really, really difficult. And our mental health is just as important as our physical health. COVID has kind of dominated the headlines, but the pandemic has had a significant impact on our health and our emotions. And we have a very, very special guest to talk about this issue with. Shesheena Bray is a mother, a therapist, yogi, a survivor advocate, an educator, and organizer. She's originally from Boston. We will not hold that against her. But she did take up roots in Philadelphia to pursue her education, and she never left. I understand that I'm a transplant as well. She is a lover of life, laughter, and a proponent of slowing down, something I need to learn how to do myself. And she wants to help people return and recognize old technology as a path to liberation. I'd like to give a warm welcome and a round of applause to Shesheena Bray.
Hey, peace.
Hey.
Justin, hi.
Hi. Well, I want to thank you for coming, and I'm glad you're here to talk with us about this super important topic.
Yes, thank you. I'm excited to be in conversation and be in community with you and everyone else.
Yeah. Awesome. And just so folks can know, if you want to learn more about Shesheena and what she's about, there is a link to her business in the bottom green link. She'll also be sharing some other links that I'll put in the chat room along with some book recommendations because we are Uncle Bobbie, so we have to be about those books.
Yes.
But I wanted to start generally. I'm almost 40, and I don't think there's ever been a point in my life where I noticed that there was this one thing that affected all of us at one time, and affected us negatively in a lot of ways at one time. And 2 days ago on our Instagram page, we asked people, how did the last year and a half affect their mental health? And we had a ton of responses.
Yeah.
Side note, you actually took the time out of your day to respond to some folks individually, which I think was super cool that you were able to do that. But talk to me about that experience, seeing what members of the Uncle Bobbie's community were sharing and how that prompted you to respond to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for asking how it was for me as well, because it definitely triggered my rescue, my rescue response, my desire to rescue, which is not really helpful. It can feel helpful in the moment because you want to swoop in and do the things and say the right things, but in the reality is that's not the truth of it. We can't rescue other people. We can rescue ourselves. We can support other people. We can encourage. We can journey alongside. And so seeing all the responses, it was heavy. Seeing real pain, seeing feelings around just kind of almost like giving up, like what can we do about it? Seeing a lot of fear. A lot of fear, and understanding how insidious fear is and how it impacts our thinking. Of course, I started to just think about the ripple effect, right? If this is what we're coming out of, if this is what we're holding after 15 months, where does that go? It doesn't just dissipate just because the season changes or the CDC changes guidelines. Like, those experiences live in our bodies. And so for me, going through seeing that, it's like, this is what we're carrying in our bodies. This is what we carry into our romantic relationships. This is what we carry into our parenting. This is what we carry into our work. This is what we carry into our perceptions about ourselves and our community. And it was just a reminder of keep doing the work, keep taking care of yourself, keep ensuring that we're creating spaces to talk about this. One of the best things that my client taught me from AA is that pain shared is pain lessened. And so that's what I saw, was people sharing their pain as a way for us to lessen it. We're collectively holding it. And when you're not the only one holding it, it makes it easier.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And One of the things that I thought was interesting, and with this being May, which is mental health
Yes.
awareness, I thought it was really cool that people felt comfortable enough on
Yes.
Bobbie's page to be as candid, be as
Yeah.
honest. And in your opinion, how important is it for people to have safe spaces to be able to talk
Yeah.
about their mental health and wellness in a very vulnerable way?
Very important. And the fact of the matter is, there are not a lot of truly safe spaces, right? We can't always ensure 100% anonymity, or 100% everyone's going to agree with you, or 100% someone's going to fully understand all of what you're experiencing. And so one of the terms that I've started to use more recently in my work, my survivor justice work, is the idea of brave spaces. And so we come in knowing that we're going to have to be a little brave in order to step into this. Like, the vulnerability of putting yourself out there, not knowing fully what you might get back, is really important. And so we need spaces where we can take off our cool. We need spaces where we can say, this is what's happening with me. We need spaces where we can normalize the range of experiences, everything from, this pandemic gave me the opportunity to slow down and I'm learning myself in new ways, and this was great for me, to, I feel so isolated and alone, right? We need those spaces, because if we are left to our own devices, to our own minds, we don't always give ourselves the best advice. We don't always know how to check on aspects of our thinking that might not always be helpful. So we need community, we need people, we need spaces where we can put down all the titles, we can put down sometimes even a lot of the jargon, and just get down to the basics of being human, right? And what it's taking to survive in Black and brown bodies under capitalism, under white supremacy. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that goes to when you and I were talking about this and figuring out like what to call it, and we kind of settled on like space and grace. With this time being so heavy on everybody else, it's like we all kind of need to not only give ourselves space, we give everyone else space, not just like the
Mm-hmm.
6 feet, but like just literally.
Yeah.
Everything is just so heavy, and the grace part is we haven't been at our best. I mean, a lot of us haven't been at our best for longer than 15 to 18 months, but
Yeah. Yeah.
particularly the last 15 to 18 months, we've not been at our best at all. So to allow people the ability to screw up and not be their best,
Mm-hmm.
and make some mistakes, it's been really critical. Um,
And
I
even,
wanted,
I was saying,
I,
even just space and grace for ourselves. Like,
mm,
can we give ourselves the space in our day to practice relaxation? Can we be gracious enough with ourselves to say, hey, I haven't been showing up the way I would quite like to as a parent, but I understand why, and this is what I'm going to work on. Yeah.
yeah, and I need to learn that as well.
I'm,
I've had so many conversations with myself about trying to give
I'm
myself
working on it.
the ability to not be at my best and not be perfect and not have all the answers. And
Mm-hmm.
it's certainly not easy. And I kind of wanted to transition a little bit because
Yeah.
on Thursday, the CDC did say, hey, folks, remember those things about masks? Well, if you're vaccinated, you don't need them anymore. And that put an incredible amount of like stress and anxiety on me because it
Mm-hmm.
was like I've been used to this kind of way of life for so long and wearing these masks and being in these spaces. And all of a sudden, it's like you don't have to wear it, and it's based on the honor system. And when has that ever failed us before? And there's this pressure to kind of get everything back to like 2019, and
Mm-hmm.
not all of us are ready.
Mm-hmm.
And my question is what do you say for people like myself and like a lot of others who you know maybe not so ready to get right back or nervous about this kind of reentry into like a post-pandemic world because I don't feel like I'm crazy, but
Yeah. Yeah.
but like
Yeah.
what with the things that I'm going through and a lot of people are going through, like like how should we work through some of that?
Yeah. You're not tripping. um, I think that's the biggest thing, is that it's okay to feel how you feel. We live in a lot of uncertainty. We live under oppressive systems. And we've also seen how this entire pandemic has been managed. So there's very real reasons for us to be cautious, for us to be afraid. And so it's okay. And in recognizing that it's okay, I also just want to keep encouraging you to come back to what it is that you're telling yourself about what's happening. Because fear, while it is a natural response and it's a helpful response, it's one of our core emotions, helps us to recognize danger in our environment, helps us to be cautious. Anything that we spend a lot of time doing is what we become good at. Or so if we're spending a lot of time in that fear place, it's going to impact our thinking, right? And anything out of balance is going to create imbalance in the body. And so sometimes we need to come back and check on our thinking and look at, is there something here that I'm not considering? Or how am I accounting for the very real feelings of fear in how I'm going about my decision making? So that's something that I would definitely encourage. And also being mindful that not everyone is sharing in the same opinion as you, which is okay, but recognizing what that feels like. So prepare, have a plan before you're going out. Really think about, what are the things that I know trigger me, right? What are the things that I know will get under my skin? How will I know is getting under my skin? Will I know once I've popped off on someone, or will I know once I start noticing that tension in my chest? And so when I notice the tension in my chest, these are the things that I'm going to do to support myself, or these are the environments that I'm going to go in, or these are the types of boundaries I want to create for myself. Hey, you know, I love my friends, but I'm going to let you know this is what I'm comfortable with, right? So before people have to ask you and you have to then like, what's my response? Perhaps a part of your plan might be preempting and saying, this is what I'm comfortable with. Letting people know in advance, so perhaps you don't feel that pressure of having to conform to somebody else's idea of safety and comfort for yourself. And again, giving yourself grace and space. It's okay. I haven't read up on what the CDC discovered to allow this lift of the ban. And so, yeah, giving yourself space to learn, and for us to learn and figure out what's happening and figure out what feels safe in your body.
Yeah, obviously, the Center for Disease Control doesn't seem to be focused on mental health and wellness, but it would be nice if that kind of things factored into when they made these recommendations, especially like the broad sweeping, resolutions that they come out with that affects us all in so many ways.
Yeah.
Um, what I wanted to what I wanted to do is kind of name, some of the things that folks are going
Mm-hmm.
through.
Mm-hmm.
You saw a lot in the conversation on Sunday, but just overall your experience of what you've seen people go through since the beginning of the pandemic. Like, what
Mm-hmm.
are some of the things that people are going through so that they know that there are names for these things and what they
Yeah.
can call it, and
Yeah.
take that first step towards accepting, what's going on.
Yeah. So fear, right? Again, and fear being something that is normal, but when we are bombarded with things that create that fear, we can move into that irrational fear, right? We can move into worry. And worry is not rational. Worry just allows you to restate the problem over and over and over again.
Mm,
And this worry is, we call anxiety, right? When we are in this constant state of worry, when we are looking at one issue and then we're conflating it with another issue, or we're finding other things to address, or we can only see one side of the issue versus the, only see things in black and white. Oftentimes that's an indication that we're anxious. And I would say 99.5% of us are anxious,
mm,
right? And so it's not about not being anxious, it's about managing the anxiety. So recognizing where your fear has moved into anxiety is really important. That's something that's very common. Looking at feelings around isolation. People have good reason to want to be to themselves, to separate, to be safe, because this is not about, I don't want to be around you. This is about people saying, I want to be okay. I don't want to die. If we really want to keep it funky, like what we're doing, because our minds are literally programmed to keep the body alive. So when we make those choices, like, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to go here, I don't want to be in these spaces, I'd rather isolate, we're saying, I want to live, I don't want to die. And that's okay. But again, we have to always go back and keep checking on our thinking. There's been a lot of loss. We've literally lost loved ones and family members, people who were important to us as a collective. And so needing time to grieve and to mourn.
right.
Right? And also the loss of what we knew to be our reality, right? Our loss of perhaps faith in systems, our loss in roles. Well, people knew themselves. I was this thing in the world, and this is how I always showed up. And with things changing, people aren't being able to show up in the ways they might be used to. So mourning those types of loss, rolling, the loss of homes, income, right? Those are very real losses. And they, just like losing a person, they deserve time, they deserve attention, they deserve to be uplifted as real losses, and the space to mourn it. You know, our grieving are our internal feelings about the loss, but mourning is what we do externally. It's the behaviors that and the activities that we put behind the grief. And because we live in a world, we live under capitalism, it's just go, go, go. Honoring the fact that people have done work for 30 plus years, or even if it was 5 years and then all of a sudden it's gone, that needs space. That needs honoring. One other thing that it wasn't on, I didn't see it in the chat, but I know to be true is also many of us, I would say all of us in some way, are feeding some type of addiction. That's how we are coping. Right? And so addiction can look like work. Addiction can look like sex. Addiction can look like a chemical substance. Addiction can look like food. Addiction can look like a lot of things, but many of us are feeding addiction in order to get through. That's also been very active in our worlds over these last 15 months. Yeah.
I feel so seen. I was having a conversation a couple days ago about I had to like just kind of cut sweets out, like kind of cold turkey last week, because for like a couple weeks in a row I was just like gummy bears, chocolate, just whatever, because that would just kind of get me through the moments, you know. So I get that the addiction part of it.
Yeah, and we can add social media to that as well, right? How many people, like the amount of screen time that we've had in this period has been exponential. And what is the impact of that? Right? What is the impact of that? So there have been a lot of responses, but I would say these have been the primary responses that I've seen from people, in addition to people feeling really grateful, not for the pandemic, but grateful for some of the ripples of the pandemic, which has forced some of us to slow down. Some of us have been able to put down things we would not have otherwise been able to put down had these things not happened. Some of us have been able to rediscover ourselves, to create time for personal projects and our personal care in ways that we've never been able to do before, which has really been beautiful. Like given some of us with some time and some money, i.e. some stimulus, the sky's the limit. Like a lot of us really just need time and capital in order to do more of what we want to do, and I would say illuminate our gifts more for the world.
Yeah, I mean, there's some silver lining. Right? I hear that, right? Because I mean, at least for me, I know that there was this situation put a lot of things in perspective, and certain things that I thought I cared a lot about weren't really that important, and other things that I may not have been paying too much attention to. I'm like, all right, I need to, you know, make sure I get to that. I wanted to go back to like the specifics about anxiety and stress, and you mentioned addiction as one of the things that can be like a byproduct of feeling these things. But what are some other triggers that can like that someone can kind of like look at themselves and say, oh, I might be suffering from anxiety and stress, that they can help, like I said, like start to name it even within their own life, like with some of the other triggers.
Yeah. So I think it's first important to name that stress is natural, right? We have a built-in stress response system. The body and mind are so intelligent. And so the body is built to have a little bit of stress. It motivates us. It keeps us going. But too much stress is not good for us. Ideally, we encounter something that is stressful. Our stress hormones kick in to help us navigate that. And by navigate, I mean run from the thing, fight the thing, or flee the thing, fight, flight, or flee. which many of us have heard of, right? That's natural. Then you deal with it, you get the adrenaline, you get the cortisol, and then you go back to a normal state. The stressor is going away. But many of us are just going from stressor to stressor to stressor to stressor and never actually returning back to that state of equilibrium. And so this impacts our mood, this impacts our thinking, this impacts our behavior, this impacts our ability to sleep, this impacts our appetite, this causes weight gain, right? When the body's in a state of stress, the brain is sending signals to the rest of the body, like thinking about, again, old technology in an ancient brain. Oftentimes stress was related to a lack of resources, a lack of food, right? And so when we get those stress hormones are turned on, our bodies, that ancient wisdom of our bodies turns on, like, oh, there's a lack of food, store the fat, right? Store the fat so that we can deal with whatever this possible lack of food or resources is going to be. But that's not, times have changed, right? So while our bodies are saying, hey, we got to store this fat to be okay, we live in spaces where even if you're in a food desert, the food that's available to you is usually the worst types of food, right? So the foods that are available to us oftentimes are not the best foods, or not the foods that are necessarily going to support our well-being. So stress has a lot of impacts on us. Stress also causes inflammation in the body. And inflammation is the root of most disease. So we have to be managing our stress. It's not optional. It's not something for somebody over there. We all have to be managing our stress. And I would say for Black and brown bodies in particular, we've become accustomed to being in a state of stress. And not accustomed to necessarily managing it, but accustomed to muscling through. Like, oh, I can do it. It's fine. Just put it on my back. Okay, it's fine. I can do it. I can do it. I can do it. I can take it. Sometimes even finding pride in it. We even big each other up. Like, look how well you're taking on all this shit, right? Like, excuse my language, but it's not really anything to praise, but we've become used to that, right? And so what we're really doing is just throwing our bodies out of balance and making us more susceptible to disease. In addition, when we're in a state of stress, we're not in our thinking mind. We're not in our prefrontal cortex, the part of our mind that's most responsible for our relationships, that helps us understand how do we interact with people and what's the best language, what's the best attire, what's the best, energy for the circumstance. When we're in stress, it's just stay alive. So whatever means necessary to get there. So I'll cut you off. I'm going to be short with you. I might be impatient with you. And this is not intentional. This is just the nature of stress, right? Not having capacity to listen to people that you care about is the result of stress. Not that you don't care. You don't have the capacity. Your body is literally your brain is literally sending you signals. You got to figure this out, not slow down and figure out, what is this person trying to communicate to me, right? So looking at our stress is really, really important. And as we know, there have been a lot of things for us to stress about. One of the other results of stress is anxiety, right? And anxiety can cause stress. They have a nice back and forth relationship. And so anxiety is worry, it's uneasiness, this fear of something imminent. And there's never anything positive. We're never worried about like, oh, I know I'm going to win $10,000 in the lottery. We don't worry about positive things. It's something imminent, it's something negative is going to happen, right? And when we're doing that, we're keeping our stress response system on, which keeps those stress hormones going in the body, which again impacts our sleep, it impacts our communication, it impacts our ability to eat, it impacts our ability to manage other disease in the body, other illness, right? We're talking about fighting off a virus, and many of our bodies are so activated, it would have a hard time fighting off the virus if we were to be impacted. Yeah, so I'm sorry, I get tangential when I think about like the real depth of these things, but stress and anxiety are, I would say, my biggest takeaway. If you don't remember any of the things that I said, we need to be managing our stress on purpose. We need to have a practice day in and day out that we are doing specifically related to managing our stress. Not all stress relievers are created equally. You want to think about activities and things that will support you that don't create stressors in of themselves, like shopping. I love it. But if we're in a stress mind, we're more likely to overspend. We're more likely to buy, I always use the example of the $100 white cowboy boots, right? Like in the moment, it seems necessary, but that is a stressed mind giving you that message. That is not actually perhaps what you would do if you're in a different state. So we need to be practicing stress management. A lot of that includes practicing relaxation.
So you said something interesting, and we'll get to the specifics of Black and Brown people in a little bit. But you talked about how we're not only like proud of like pushing through and fighting through the stresses and anxieties, but like we kind of big each other up. And it's funny because if I like broke my leg in front of my friend and I kept trying to walk on it, they would like
What are
Justin,
you
I'm
doing?
calling 911, get you an EMT, and you're gonna go get that leg fixed. But we just don't do that for ourselves or other people when it comes to mental health. And why do you think that is? Why do you think that we kind of like don't attribute the same level of urgency to the things happening in our brain and in our hearts or whatever to breaking a leg or, you know, busting up your shoulder?
Capitalism. um, I mean, well, one, because we dress it up and we put fancy bows on it, right? And so it's hustle culture, right? It's money over bitches. It's I'll sleep when I'm dead. It's it's systems that tell you only need 5 hours of sleep, or sleep 2 hours and get up and you do this. It's I'm up at 3 a.m. What are you doing? It's that, right? And because a lot of that is rooted in how we support ourselves and how we gain validation as people, which is natural, it's hard to put it down. We also don't have good examples of quote unquote success that didn't come about as a result of those things. So it's really hard to say that's not the formula, that's not the way forward. So yeah, it's dressed up, and we don't always see the immediate impact, right? Your leg, you breaking your leg will impact your ability to drive, your ability to stand at work, your ability to go up and down the stairs. So because it's so obvious, it's going to stop you or force you to slow down and reconsider. But if your stress is just you yelling at your child behind closed doors, like, we can move through that, right? If your stress is, I've lost a lot of weight, but hey, I think I look good, it's okay, right? Or whatever the justification is, it doesn't always look the same. But the fact of the matter is there are very real, there's a very real impact of continuing to be in a state of stress. DSM, the next DSM is going to likely include a term called toxic stress, which is specifically looking at the impact of prolonged stress in children, right? We're recognizing too much stress will shape you right into your adulthood, right? We know that being, I don't even want to get into like epigenetics, but we need to be managing our stress and not wrapping it up in these pretty bows and justifying it being okay, because it does have, again, real impact on our body. And again, stress, inflammation, the root of many diseases. Do you want to stay alive? If you want to stay alive, you have to manage your stress. Last thing, I read it, I didn't read the article, I'll be honest. I read the headline and skimmed. It was just talking about in 2016, the number of people who had died, who had worked 55 hours per week. It was like 777,000 people or something like that, had died as a result of stress from working 50 hours per week. If you read further, it was mostly between the age range of like 45 and 56. But I think that's just very telling, right? People are dying because they're working, and we're told that we have to work in order to survive, and we have to work well in order to be successful.
That's powerful. Yeah, and I even think about, like I said, my own I got to get this task accomplished. So I'll deal with the stress and anxiety later. I do want to get to, for everyone on here, Uncle Bobbie's is a space for Black folks. This is a space for marginalized communities. And, we're 2 months into this international pandemic. And then Derek Chauvin puts his knee on George Floyd for 9 minutes and killed him. And it kind of just sets off this kind of like atom bomb around the world where white supremacy and systemic inequality and all other things tied to racism kind of comes to the front lines. The irony of it is it isn't new if you're Black. Like, this is the thing that you've been dealing with, since you were existing in this world. But it was like, man, we're dealing with all of this COVID stuff. And now these things are now like on my timeline. They're on my TV. I can't escape like the death of Black and brown bodies.
Yes.
Like, can you speak a little bit to specifically what folks of color have been going through the last year and a half that differs from just like pandemic related stress, anxiety, fear, and all of those things?
Yeah. Before we do that, I'm just writing some quick notes so I don't forget. Okay. Before we do that, I just want to take a collective moment for us to check in with ourselves, right? This is a heavy conversation, right? Because we're not talking about something that doesn't impact every single one of us. And so I just want to take a moment for us to practice in real time, slowing down to notice what is happening so that we can better take care of ourselves. And so what I'm just going to ask everyone to do in this moment is to, if your feet can touch the ground, to place your feet on the ground and to notice your feet on the ground. If you can, tune into any sensations of the body where there's movement in the body, tension, tightness, coolness, warmth. All the sensations in our bodies carry messages, often related to our emotional states and our thoughts. When you said Derek Chauvin's name, I felt my stomach drop. And though I can just move on, I noticed it. So I just want to give people the moment to notice what's happening in your body. Might you need a break? Do you need to stand up? Do you need to drop into some deeper breaths? Do you need to stretch? Water? Do you need a hug? Okay. And so this is a really important part of us taking care of ourselves, is making the time for what we need, even when we think we don't have. We got an hour, we got to get through this. No, we'll do what we can, right? And so notice what's happening. Something really basic you can do multiple times a day is check, scale of 1 to 10, where's my anxiety right now? 10 being very high. Okay. What's my energy like right now? 10 being high energy. My energy is at a 4, my anxiety is at a 6. That's really important information. If you're about to go into a meeting, yeah, you should know that, right? If you're about to be with your child or be with a loved one, or you're trying to sit down to focus, you want to notice that, because you might need to do some other things, or you might need to do some things differently in order to account for that. And that's taking care of ourselves. That's slowing down, noticing what's happening, naming what's happening with us, and then nourishing ourselves, doing something on purpose to take care of whatever we're noticing. So, in terms of your question around the impact on Black and brown bodies, it's fatigue. There's so much fatigue because this is not new, right? When we were talking about stress, again, many of us, our base level, if this is the ideal base level, right, in terms of just well-being, many of us are already functioning here, right? So we're not even at base level. Our normal is already hovering above here due to historic trauma, right? Due to day-to-day racism, due to the fact that we have to wonder if every experience we have is a microaggression. Is this attack on me? What does this actually mean? That is wearing. That is so wearing. have to constantly question, double check, to have to reinforce, to warn, to prepare is so fatiguing on the body. In addition to the onslaught of then state-sanctioned violence that has been perpetrated against us. Burnout, anger, disillusionment, dissociation as almost like a helping response. Like, it's so much that I can't actually be here. Right? I've had many conversations with people over these last few months that we can't actually take in the depth of what we're experiencing fully, because if we did, it could possibly kill us, honestly. So we find ways to cope, right? Numbing as a form of coping. It's not good, it's not ideal, but it's something that we do to cope. Violence, the normalization of violence, that, oh, that's sad, I'm sorry that happened. But if we really took in each of these cases in the way that they're shown to us, if we really stopped and took in the impact of these and then the ripple effect, it would overwhelm us even more. And so we're in a very particular situation where we did not create these conditions, we did not choose these conditions, but we're here. So how do we take care of ourselves within these conditions, right? We are facing spiritual warfare, we are facing physical warfare, and we are facing psychological warfare. I don't call it police brutality, I call it police terrorism, right? We don't say just the police, this is state-sanctioned violence. And all of that is to point back to the fact that there's a plan behind this process. There's a plan around what's happening. Terrorism is used to induce fear because we understand the impact on fear in people's thinking and behavior, right? And so being able to name, oh, you want me to be anxious, you want me to be worried, you want me to be so focused on my bag that I'm not going to have the capacity to turn my gaze towards all the ways you're undermining me, right? And so the fatigue is real. The fatigue is very real, and it's okay if you're tired. It's okay if you can't keep up with the headlines. It's okay if you can't show up to the rally. It's okay if you can't show up to the meeting. It's okay if you just have to turn things off. It's okay if you don't know the name of that person. A lot of that is okay because it's what we need in order to move through, in order to cope. We can't take it all in. We can't. So we need each other to, again, help us hold these experiences and normalize, hey, you know what? I'm feeling like that too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's, just the way you ended, like, to normalize these things and to keep naming it, that, the traumas that, if you're having a bad day or you're going through something, you're not at your best, like you said, whether you're a parent, whether, you're in a relationship, any type of relationship, to give yourself that space and grace. The one other thing I wanted to make sure we talked about before we talked about coping mechanisms, some of the things, was specifically talking about how this has been affecting women, women of color specifically, in ways that I don't think get talked about at all, if not enough, right? Like, mothers who have to, wear like multiple hats before the pandemic, but now have to like become like school counselors, teachers, principals within their own home. What can we say for all the women, all the moms, all the women of color out there that are experiencing the kind of traumas that you talked about?
Well, first and foremost, I'm breathing with you. This is a hug from me to you. You're not alone. this is a, we talk about intersecting identities, and this particular identity carries a lot. And I'm one of those people. I think one of the things that we want to consider in this moment are just kind of like narratives around Black motherhood, how it's supposed to look, how we're supposed to be, or even just Black womanhood. We're often looked to as the problem solvers. We'll get it done, right? Eventually, that bottom line, we got the top and the bottom line, right? We're gonna get the other people in order. We're gonna give these people what they need, doing all the orchestrating, and that is tiring. And so it's tiring, it's imbalanced, rooted in patriarchy, a lot of it, and so I think it's important for us to be able to give ourselves a break, really give ourselves a break. Parenting is hard. Mothering is really hard. Being responsible for helping to support the raising of a human being into a kind and or productive human being is really, really big work that is often not acknowledged and honored in the way that it should be. Because again, the assumption is muscle through, you got this, we've seen you do this before, the generations before you have done this, is in you to get it done, to do it. They were suffering too. And so there's no need for us to continue to normalize the suffering that's come along with motherhood. I think it's important that we name it. And as much as possible, I want to encourage mothers to forgive themselves for not showing up the way perhaps they've wanted to show up for themselves, their children, or those around them. Early in the pandemic, I had a very embarrassing moment. I was in a client session virtually, and I thought I muted myself, and I berated my daughter, and I turned back to my client whose eyes were like,
oh.
And yeah, like clearly it still sits with me, but I've also forgiven myself because I understand the stress that I was under. I understand everything that was happening in the adjustment. And so I forgave myself, but I also then went back to make sure that I apologized to my client and also to my daughter. I made repair there. And so, for the mothers, for the caregivers, for the aunties, for the grandmothers, all those who have stepped in to support, you forgive yourself and consider where you can repair, right? Can you go back to something? Is there a moment that can be revisited or some words that can be offered? Because that repair supports you, and it also supports the relationship and whoever that person was who felt the impact of our stress, the impact of our lack of capacity. And I'd also say ask for help. And this is something that I'm sure many of us struggle with. I struggle with myself. But allowing people to show up for you. There's some people who do have the capacity. There's some people who do have the times. There's some people who do have the financial means and would actually be happy. And we also know that there are places where some of us have asked for help and we have not always gotten the help, or gotten the help in the ways that we've needed and or expected. And I want to encourage you to name those moments and also consider that's not going to be the case with everybody. And we cut ourselves off from asking for help because of these experiences. We're really doing ourselves a disservice and placing ourselves in a really dangerous circumstance to muscle through things that no one should try to muscle through alone. So share what's happening with you as you ask for help. Also share with other mothers, other mamas, perhaps in your immediate space, perhaps it's in an online space, perhaps you want to start journaling, perhaps you want to find one of those websites where you can just go and tell all your secrets and into like this anonymous hole that nobody knows. But find an outlet to share, to say, to name what's been happening with you. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Um, we have a question that kind of uh, segues into what we were going to talk about next,
Yes.
which is what can we do about it? We're all feeling so many feelings. Let's say we're fortunate enough to get to the point where we can name it, we can identify it in ourselves. We found the addiction and saying, oh, this might be stress or anxiety.
Mhm.
What's some of the things, particularly while we're still in this kind of isolated state because of the pandemic, what can we do for ourselves? What are some coping mechanisms
Mhm.
that we can safely do with ourselves to, provide us with that sense of like safety
Okay.
and balance?
Yeah. There are lots of fancy things you can do. We're going to keep it really simple. Okay. Slow down. Slow down. And if you thought you slow down some more. And the reason why we need to slow down is because we have stories that we tell ourselves, and those stories are what we use to navigate our life. I know what this is. I know what this is how I have to deal with this, how to deal with that. But those stories are not always accurate. And so we need to be able to slow down enough in order to check back in. Is what I'm telling myself true? Is what I'm telling myself rooted in fear? Is what I'm telling myself rooted in some other experience that I've had? And if that's the case, what do I want to do differently? Or how do I want to account for that? So I would say slow down. I'm a huge, huge, huge proponent of morning routines. Get you a morning routine. Evening routines too, but specifically a morning routine, a concerted amount of time, even if it's 5 minutes or it's 90 minutes, depending on your lifestyle, but an intentional, concerted amount of time where you are using to pour into yourself before you start reacting to the world, reacting to waking your children up, reacting to making food for other people, reacting to answering emails, reacting to checking social media, reacting to getting to work, whatever those things are, taking a moment to pour into yourself. And ideally, including in your morning routine something that supports you with the cultivation of relaxation. Oftentimes, this comes from mindful activities where we are solely focused on one thing. Taking that cup of coffee that you rush through in the morning, what about if you made that a ritual, right? If you slow down to really smell the coffee, right? To listen to the sounds of the coffee grinder, to notice the change in color, to look at the steam, to feel the weight of your glass or your mug. Do you want to put it in something that's really special? And then sitting down, not walking around with it while you do six other things, but just sitting down and then enjoying that cup of coffee. And so that turns something that you just like to do or feel like you might need in the morning. I know a lot of people need coffee, into something that will support you in practicing slowing down, support you in building the capacity to be in one space, to get out of that fight, flight, freeze, to get out of that stress mode and come back to a state of equilibrium, right? You might also want to add in there exercise. And so that's the other thing that I would suggest. Exercise. We need to engage the body. Our emotional states live in the body. It gets stuck in the body. And so we need to be engaging the body. Exercise can support with how we manage trauma in the body, right? I think we can get into that in another conversation perhaps. But just on a basic level, exercising, is great for the brain. We get those happy hormones, endorphins, right? We need that in order to carry on. Exercise can be as simple as walking, right? Getting 15 minutes of walking. Why walking is so powerful? Yes, of course, the circulation, but it's the bilateral stimulation, left, right, engaging both hemispheres of the brain. There are other ways to get that bilateral stimulation, but walking it out, literally, like when you're going through something, walk it out, right? Walk it out. Give yourself some opportunity to get out of that environment, to get out of your mind, get out of the stories and start walking, feeling your feet on the pavement, right? Feeling your heel, the ball joint of your foot, and then your toes hit the pavement. Noticing what is taking in your right hip in order for your left hip to react. So being mindful of your walking. That's another mindful activity. but some type of exercise is really important to helping us to manage what's going on. Therapy, right? I like to think about therapy as old technology. When you were introducing me, that was mentioned. I'd like to share with people this idea that a lot of the things that we're seeing are dressed up in new language, right, and jargon, but a lot of it is old, right? And so the idea of going to someone and being able to talk and to spill and them hold that for you is not a new concept. Right? White people did not teach, old white men in Sweden, right, and Amsterdam didn't teach us how to hold space for each other. We've been doing this for a very long time. But we've also had communal systems that made it inherent that we could have somebody to go to, that you were not suffering in isolation. That's a part of what causes trauma, is that we experience something and we don't have people around us to normalize how bad it was, how wrong it was, how intense it was. So we have to do that ourselves. That's what causes the traumatic impact. It's the event, and then the response to the event is the compound components of trauma. When we lived in more communal spaces where there was more accountability, right? And not to say like we lived in some perfect heyday at any period in time, but there's just certain things that we lack in our community institutions, in our home institutions, that create more isolation and create more individual suffering. And so going to therapy is a way to return to something very basic, having a space where you feel safe enough to spill out, to pour what's happening with you so that you don't carry it yourself. We're not supposed to carry it ourselves. Other people are supposed to help us move through our experiences. So I would definitely say therapy. I've shared with you 3 therapy networks, all geared towards Black and Brown people. And one of which, MEND, I know specifically, is trauma focused. And so they are training clinicians in evidence-based trauma-informed practices to support us because they understand what's happening with us. Find a therapist that is a good fit for you, of whatever race, creed, whatever is important to you. But there is also something beneficial, or you might recognize you need to be able to sit across from somebody who can talk about white supremacy with you, or you need to sit across from somebody who can talk about ancestral work with you, right? Because that's also a part of our healing and our restoration and remembering. So I would definitely say therapy. And so along those lines, dig in spiritually, whatever that means to you. I'm not here to proselytize any one way of being or believing, but as I mentioned before, this is spiritual warfare. And so being able to ground yourself in practices and beliefs that help you understand the why of things, in addition to supporting you and moving through the how, is really important. And routines. Find other routines that support you. We talked about stress management earlier. Your stress management routine might be housed in your morning routine, or it might be something else. But do something on purpose on a regular basis as much as you can. And if you fall off, it's okay. Be gracious with yourself. Come back the next day, or do it later in the day, right? If you miss the window, but you still have time later, just do it later in the day. It's okay. Only you know that. You're holding yourself to that standard.
That's awesome. You had me taking notes. We'll definitely try to implement as many of those. I want to, save some space for anyone who has any additional questions. There's obviously no pressure to ask any questions. This is very, very heavy and very, very personal. While we wait for any potential questions to come through, Shesheena, I wanted to know, kind of wrapping up the space and grace, like what are ways that we can hold space and grace for the people around us and create an environment where peace um, feel like, they feel, people feel more comfortable. People can open up. People, like,
Mm,
what are the things that we can do
yeah,
to kind of break these bad
yeah,
capitalist kind of habits that
yeah,
we do?
yeah. So one, showing up in our own vulnerability, right? Create space for other people to say, oh, this is okay. It's okay to share, right? And so doing that in a way, again, that makes you feel safe. So share at your own risk, but share what you can share, right? When someone asks you how you're doing, tell them instead of like, yeah, I'm good. Like, like today's been kind of hard. Or I'm pretty good, but I got I'm feeling something creeping up, or whatever the case may be, right? So just being more honest invites other people to be more honest. In addition, when we're communicating, um, talking about the impact, talking about how someone's behavior or thoughts, the impact on our emotional, it made me feel like this. And so when we say those kind of things, people have to tap into their own emotional responses like, oh, I know what that feels like, right? Versus you did this to me, this thing made me feel like this. That invites somebody into the conversation to say, I can understand that, versus putting them on the accusing end. Look what you did, right? Which oftentimes stops the conversation. Working on our listening skills. um, yeah, learn how to really be an active listener. Um, yeah, as I'm saying that, I'm like, you need to work on that too. Like, still need to work on my listening. Even as a therapist, still need to work on my listening. So being fully present with somebody and being attuned to what they're saying, what they're not saying, what their bodies are saying, and then determining, is it even necessary for me to say something? I think we have a tendency to want to swoop in and solve people's problems for them because it's uncomfortable to see other people be in discomfort. I just did that this morning. Someone was venting and I was like, you should do this. And I'm like, you didn't even ask for advice. Perhaps you just wanted me to listen. And so asking how people want to be supported. Do you want me to listen? Do you want advice? Do you want me to come over and just be quiet? You want me to cook you a meal and drop it off? Just want me to send you a text or a voice note? So asking how people want to be supported, and also in that same thing, going back to that first point about vulnerability, sharing also how you'd like to be supported. It would be really helpful if you could. I would appreciate it if you would not, right? That's how we better take care of each other. Being quick to own our stuff, not in a, ooh, okay, I'm now, it doesn't absolve us of the impact of what we've done to somebody, but naming, I recognize that what I did might have been harmful, or I recognize that what I did, even though that was not my intention, you didn't receive that well, or that created more work for you. And so I want to name that. I apologize. Is there something that I can do? Right? You might not even have all of that, but just saying, like, I just want to acknowledge how my actions have impacted you. As
Mm.
people, we just want validation. We want to be loved. We want to be cared for. We're really big babies, right? We're really, really big babies. And so when someone else can come, when we can acknowledge to each other where we've impacted each other, it feels really good. It's like, thank you. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for honoring my humanity enough um, to say something.
That's really cool. That's really cool. We did get one quick question from Fortitude, who asked if you had a YouTube channel.
No, I don't have a YouTube channel.
Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
they wanted to see the gems and more gems from you at later dates.
Thank you.
But
I appreciate that subtle push. Um, that is something that I'm working on. To that point around fear, is just not shying away from my own light and sharing more. Um, yeah. So thank you for that subtle push.
yeah. Well, we will have this video on our YouTube page. We'll put some clips on our Instagram, so you will be able to see this conversation again and Shesheena and I have already spoken that we will try to do something
Yes,
to have
absolutely.
more of these kind of events where she's able to share her gifts with y'all.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else that you wanted to say before you wrap up, Shesheena?
I'm gonna do a personal plug in a moment, but I just say thank you for being in community with me. I'm grateful for all of you. So please take great care of yourselves and each other, and be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself on purpose. It's we are human beings and not human doers, and so the more we can return to our humanity, the more we'll be able to enjoy our time on this planet. In terms of some personal plugs, I'd love to stay in community with you. Some easy ways to do that: on Mondays evenings, I host a meditation, the 720 meditation. I actually started it last year because of the pandemic, just recognizing like you might need some space. So I'm a big proponent of meditation. You can add that to the list of things in terms of mindful activities. So if you want to come practice with me, this is a mindful meditation space, but I incorporate other mindful activities to support people in cultivating some ease and calm. It's free. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to introduce yourself. You don't even have to turn on your camera. So you can join me at the 720 meditation this Saturday. That's this Sunday. I will be teaching yoga through Studio 34 in West Philadelphia. This will be virtual, but from 5 to 6 p.m. every Sunday they have POC yoga. So I'm very excited to be teaching this Sunday. So come join me on the mat. I would really appreciate that. Besides that, you can just connect with me on Instagram at Going Inward. Hey, you can also check out my website, Going Inward Wellness, as well. The books that I think that Jess is going to share perhaps tomorrow, I just wanted to name the whys behind them. So analysis in this moment is really important because sometimes when we lack analysis, it increases the stress. We don't know what's happening, right? So 2 things that might support an analysis is Black fatigue. This is going to give you some real basic information, really straightforward, like statistics and all. This is the impact of racism and trauma on Black bodies, right? If you really want to deepen that and get into political implications of that, because we are dealing in power, I would say oldie but goodie and a head scratcher. It's one you might have to sit down with for a while, is The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. He's a Martinican psychiatrist, and what he really breaks down is the impact, the psychological impact of colonization, right? What happens to a colonized mind. And so while colonization looks different here in the States, we understand the thread of psychological impact. So that's something to consider. So if you want to better understand trauma and why we have to engage the body keeps the score. This is probably one of the most preeminent books around trauma. So what do we do once we have this understanding? We need practices, we need skills in order to move these experiences through our bodies. So 2 books that I would recommend are My Grandmother's Hands, as well as Love and Rage. Both of these books have multiple practices for you to engage in so that you don't have to, if you're like, I don't know what to do, I don't know where to start, I don't even know what to say, they'll help support you in doing that work.
Awesome. You know we like the book recommendations.
Yes.
Can't go wrong with a book. Well, Shesheena, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to share with us.
It's been a true pleasure. I love this. Thank you.
I look forward to doing this again soon. And to everyone out there, thank you for joining us. And you know where to find more information about Uncle Bobbie's, UncleBobbies.com, on Instagram at Uncle Bobbie's, and on Twitter at Uncle Bobbie's. And of course, if you're in the area, stop through, get a latte, get a book.
With your mask on.
Yes, with your mask on. So everyone stay safe, and we'll see you all real soon. Bye now.
Peace.